I would like to thank the two deans of the arts and medicine class, Dušan Šuput and Violeta Dinescu, who have once again put together such a wonderful program. Violeta had already, as you know, co-organized the previous lecture series, Science Meets Arts, Arts Means Science. And you also know our academy combines art and science in its title because we are convinced that art and science are central expression of human creativity. And this brings me to the two lectures of this evening, stages in creative processes. How much is learned routine and technical craft involved in art? How much is creative inspiration? When the composer Beethoven went for a walk in the Vienna forest, or the chemist Kekulé sat in a carriage dreaming away, they had inspirations and ideas for pieces of music and melodies or chemical structures like the benzene ring. But in the end, the inspiration had to be solid and carefully worked out according to the rules of arts and science. So both Beethoven and Kekulé were also skillful experts in their disciplines. In this lecture, we will also hear about the connection between music composition and painting. One of my favorite painters is Paul Klee, who was also a musician. And he wanted to express the time dimension, that means musical dynamics, in his paintings. Paintings are static. He wants to express the dynamics as well. And I'm curious to hear more about these connections. A creative medium par excellence is the human voice. I must confess that when I heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time in my youth, and suddenly, after dramatic preparation by the orchestra, a human voice began to sing, I was shocked. We will hear in a second lecture about the detailed medical and scientific conditions of voice, the anatomical, genetic, hormonal, neurological, mechanical, chemical, and the thermal conditions of a voice, but also about the social and cultural conditions for the effect of a voice. But in the end, the voice is the most intimate personal expression of human communication, which touches us the most, even in the age of technical communication. So it will definitely be exciting again this evening, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your presentation is very precious for us. I would like to have the honor now to present Ivar Frounberg. He is a Danish composer. After graduating in his home country, he attended specialized composition studies, among others at the summer course at Academia Chigiana in Siena, with the famous composer and architect Yanis Xenakis. He continued also his studies in Buffalo, New York, with Morton Feldman, the famous American composer. The development of his artistic personality in the international context of the musical world played a special role in the orientation of his understanding for the position of music within the art in general. This is reflected, for example, in a wonderful way in his work Dreiklang, in which he creates new types of musical structures in which extended polyrhythms intertwined with extended harmony. Ivar Frounberg has composed numerous works for orchestra and different instrumentations. Characteristic of his creation is also the combination of acoustic instruments with a computer. He also has a complex work as a musical analyst and in new composition technique. Also noteworthy is his rich activity, both pedagogical and inclusion in his activities of renowned institutions such as the board of the Danish Composers Society, of the Institute of Electroacoustic, of the Danish section of the International Society of Contemporary Music, the Danish Broadcasting System. After teaching at the Royal Danish Academy, Electroacoustic Music teaches, in Copenhagen, he became professor of composition at the Norwegian Academy of Music in Oslo, where he is also living now, and where he also cultivated contact with visual arts, creating the famous National Norwegian Art Research Fellowship Program, where he is the supervisor. He is also a member of the planning committee for the International NIME conference in Oslo. Ivar Frounberg received numerous distinctions. One of them is the prestigious Carl Nielsen Award. It gives for me a great pleasure to offer the floor to our guest, Ivar Frounberg.
Thank you for presenting me and also for accepting my presentation. I shall speak about stages in creative processes and take my point of departure in some documented practices in painting and some documented composition practices. Something is happening, that's good. I will be observing painting practices relating to the Danish painter Per Kirkeby and the German painter Gerhard Richter, and then also some of my own paintings. Then I will further on go into music composition as described by Janakis in his formalized music and by Morten Feldman in his lectures during my studies in Buffalo. And then I will end with a proposed generalized model of how the creative work, the stages of the creative work can be divided into small parts. And then at the end, and that might be at the discussion at the end, we can discuss analogies between painting and composition processes and possible transfers into other fields like research, for example. First of all, creative work encompasses several diverse skills. We can say that the artist must master being both an architect and an engineer and an entrepreneur. And I will be concentrating on the creational work, the architect vocation in for the artist to build in all practical necessities into an aesthetic form. While I will not be speaking so much about the engineering aspects, which will be for painting, the art history and theory of colors and so on, and for composition, music theory, instrumentation, music history, and so on. And I will also not speak about the entrepreneurial part, which are the skills needed to succeed in the field, actually, practical skills. Arranging and facilitation of events, working with agents, promotion, copyright and performance rights handling, etc. Those are the things I won't address in this speech. We will go straight on to Gerhard Richter, an international known German painter in the style of abstract expressionism, you could say. What you see here on the screen is not 3 pictures. It is a documentation by the artist of the first 3 stages. We shall see 10 stages, but we see the first 3 here during the process of painting the painting called Cage from 2006. Notice the first painting. It is basically a random action to initiate the canvas for the artist, and it will disappear totally. In the next stages, we will see the adding of yellow and blue in the 5th stage, and we will then come a focus on red in the stage 6. The red will stay on, the other will be mingled in later on. And again, here there's almost no difference between the 2, except that he has accentuated the color red in stage 8. And that goes on in stage 9. We see the focus on red, which is again downplayed in the final stage. And we see only faint, very faint traces of the original canvas, how it looked like when he started off doing the painting. So the painting marked 10 is the final stage, and the 1 is the first stage. And there's no connection between them except for the process of layering and putting things on top, colors on top of each other. And one could conclude in this sequence that we notice that the reading of an actual stage, the painter reading where he is, and that is feeded his actions for going on and the painting onwards. The big problem, of course, is when to stop, of course. And there we will look towards Per Kirkeby. He's an internationally known Danish painter, a geologist, and writer. The picture shown to the left is called Mild Winter, and that's just an illustration. I don't have the possibility of showing single stages, or for that sake, the actual picture called Winter's Tale, which the whole thing will be about. The painting process of Winter's Tale was documented on video by the Danish filmmaker Jesper Jargil and published in 1996. And this is the source from which I quote Per Kirkeby now going on. It's a big canvas. I don't know the exact measurements, but I can judge it to be between sort of 5 times 3 meters. And the video camera was positioned in the atelier and standing there for the whole process of painting from the very first beginning, putting the canvas on the wall, to the very end when the visitors came to see the final picture. On how to start a painting, Per Kirkeby says, one has to start somewhere. Then I do a line, just to get started. And he also says, I marked up the canvas in advance, so there's an edge I can paint to. I just have to cover the canvas with colors. The first layers is always like conquering a territory. We see it's not very far from the process of Gerhard Richter. And in the process also of painting, there's a continuous reading of the current stage, which defines the actions to be taken to reach the next following stage. But then Per Kirkeby also introduces methods and obstacles. He doesn't like colors red and green And that's why he used them, in order to get the machinery started, as he pointed out. Also, he invites his gallery owner because he's such a nice negative therapist. He will be very critical to him, and he needs the resistance. And he can put up other paintings. We see him put up, bringing other paintings and putting them up in front of the actual painting. And then he will work from one canvas directly onto the next. And also putting up in order to see how and what kind of impact a definite element will have in the actual painting. He also will use overhead projectors, not because he cannot paint, but because he wants to transfer something as a copy, not an actual painting. And then he says, you must use your intuition, take a nap, and hope your intuition will get out of the bed while everything else is still snoring. Further on, the picture takes over the role of intuition and tells you what to do. And here we are closer to the end of the painting process. He says, for example, the more practice you become, the more you learn that you work your way towards possible points of beauty and brilliance in order to have something to sacrifice and trade off. So he uses colors he doesn't like. He makes beauty things just to destroy them in the process of painting. And when do we stop painting? He stops painting when he has no corrections to add. Simply, he looks at the painting, and if he doesn't correct it anymore, then it is finished. I will now show you my series of 5 paintings called Insights. They were produced in 2019 as 5 separate paintings and only later put together in a series. The medium is oil pastel and ink on paper, and the size is around 40 by 60. Before I retired from teaching composition, I worked in the field of artistic research, which at that time in 2004 was in the making at art institutions all over Europe. And I was involved with the Norwegian program of artistic research, and that work introduced me to interdisciplinary work processes. So when I retired, I took up painting again. I have been drawing and painting in my childhood, but now I wanted to see how it was to work as a composer working on the painting process. Let's have a closer look on the single paintings. The first insight. What to notice is that there are 2 distinct visual elements. 2 instances of a trapezoid form, one heavily colored, and the one more fragile as a piece of glass, either to look through or maybe mirroring the other. And the other visual element is a meandering brownish band crossing the painting from edge to edge. In the second painting, we again meet the same elements, the meandering ribbons and the glassy trapezoid, but this time they're counterpointed with 6 flower-like figures creating a rhythmic pattern. If we accept the musical language, we can understand the trapezoid as a motive and the division into 5 paintings as 5 movements of a single music composition. It's worth notating here that the orientation up-down not necessarily is the same as when I worked on the painting. I work on the painting from all sides, and then at the end I decide what is up and what is down. And in this case, it was only decided when it was exhibited at the exhibition space. The third inside shows again the trapezoid as an opening into an almost naturalistic landscape, mountains reaching into the blue sky. The ribbons are transformed and fragmented into a bigger arabesque. At this point, we could maybe think of variations on a theme as a musical form. The fourth, again, we recognize the same elements, the trapezoid, the ribbon, but now again with some withered flowers forming a rhythmic intersection, which remind us of the second painting. So we have a kind of symmetry in the series. And the last, we see the trapezoid as windows opening up for our sensation of a behind world of nature, mountains and their surroundings. It's important to stress that every painting was made as an unique item. And they were not in the sequence, they were not made in the sequence they appear when I put them together later on into one final series. And this arrangement of the paintings can be some kind of parallel with musicians actually interpreting the score of the composer. So here, the artist is interpreting his own sequence of paintings, so to speak. And that led us into the composition processes. A common saying that is often attributed to Igor Stravinsky is that the composition process is 1% inspiration and 99% transpiration. Well, Stravinsky didn't say that. He could maybe have said that, but I think the right source is actually Thomas Alva Edison. We will be looking at some points that Yannis Xenakis has put up as a sequence of how he divides his composition process in the book Formalized Music, which was published it has been published several times actually. And then we will be looking at some issues, key issues for Morten Feldman in his lectures when I studied in Buffalo. So why these composers? Because I knew them both, and because they also both have addressed the composition process in public. So I will try to be very short here, and in order not to take too much time, because it could be very technical, and it could also be it could require very much time. But I think what you should look for here is the general flow of the composition process as Xenakis describes it. The initial concept, you want a specific landscape of events based on intuition or provisional or definitive data. And I will return to these data, the concept of data as a part of point of departure in the composition process later on. Then you select the entities that implement the events, transcribing them into a suitable symbolic representation, the sonic entities. You will decide on which instrumentation, what kind of sounds, what kind of playing techniques will be used, what will make up as a sonic entity. And then you will decide on transformations between the sonic entities, how they transform from one to another. And then you go into a micro composition, which is a decision on which techniques to be used. You decide on the laws, the techniques that are used to combine the sonic entities. And in the case of Xenakis, and for me and for many others, it could be a program, actually. It's a computer program. And then, of course, you have to program the program. You have to actually do the programming and make an implementation of the calculations, which will be a sort of a critical thing that you go back to the micro composition. If the implementation of the calculating poses some questions, you want to change things maybe, and you modulate, then you will be running around these three things a lot of times: micro composition, programming, implementation of calculations. And at the end, you will get a symbolic result, which can be transcribed into music notation. And then the music notation can become the basis for the sonic realization of the piece. So this is how Xenakis in his book, Formalized Music, describes this process of composition. We see here a flow chart, and that's an in-time structure. Every action has its position in the flow, and two actions cannot be interchanged. Well, the outcome, however, of the program could set to be an out-of-time structure. And there's a distinction in the thinking of Iannis Xenakis between in-time structures and out-of-time structures. And out-of-time structures, because the use of stochastic processes, then the structural outcome do not change if you interchange the individual elements of the results. They will still form the same kind of statistical distribution, even if you maybe leave someone out and you can interchange them as you want. And Xenakis did that very heavily. I know from a doctoral thesis that someone has made. I can't remember now exactly the person. But this in-time and out-of-time structures also lead us to another thing that is important, because in-time structures we know from also from Arnold Schoenberg. The 12th tone row, we have a sequence, a given sequence of elements. We have one, and then the next, and the next element, and the next element, and they have to be in a certain order in order to create an identity. Another way of working for composers will be out-of-time structures, making up a library. So you don't start in the library at letter A and start with all the writers on A and then go on to B and C and D and E and F. When you go into a library, you have a random access to all the books, all the structures you have been making up, and you can just take one out, and then you can look at it and say, oh, this is nice to use in this case, in this situation. So the idea of library is very important, and it comes back actually later on as well. The key issues for Morten Feldman, one was calculated intuition. Stravinsky in Music Poetics describes inspiration as a process that springs out from the composition process itself. I mean, he says that working on the composition also gives you an inspiration to work on. Feldman goes a step further and postulates that just generating any material will develop your intuition. And here, intuition and inspiration, we can see it's considered the same, basically. From a visit in Feldman's flat in Buffalo, I noticed that small papers with on each one consisting of one bar of singular music events were taped to the panel beside the grand piano. Feldman simply made bars at random at the piano, taped up the ones he liked, and after some time, the collection of singular events became a library from which he could select elements in any order. So he could just take it down from the wall and put it on the ruled paper. And here we have the next notion that is important for Feldman. He ruled up with a fixed number of bars on each system of the note paper in order to have the freedom to put a long or a short. I mean, if they were different lengths, he had to space the whole thing. But since he has made a regular pattern of divisions of the paper, then he could put his elements, musical elements, at any place, at any time. And he worked on the floor, simply just putting these into the grid and making symmetries and making different structures of different kinds. By placing event-forming visual patterns, for example, the notion of lucky combinations arose. And a part of the composition process for Feldman was the personal ability to follow the lucky combinations given by the intuition. The nature of the generative work was important for Feldman. He spoke warmly about procedures and warned against method, the method being a mechanical work process and the procedure being an activity that you engage in. Feldman composed using structures like sequences of different bar signatures repeating themselves for a while, or visual patterns of symmetry within the grid. But as Feldman pointed out, a structure becomes non-existent as it confirms its own existence. Therefore, the most important moment in the composition process is to quit the structure, making it incomplete or dysfunctional, actually. So far, we have been seeing three main stages in the creative process. The initiation of the process, the Kirkeby and Richter just doing something random on the canvas. The process itself, making composition, working process itself, and then when to stop the process. And we can call these three stages pre-composition, composition, and post-production somehow. At least in order to have something to group the amount of elements that now comes out. The three stages of composition, well, we do not start with nothing. Just as the painters were doing some random things, we have already, as a musician, you will have, there might be a person who has commissioned the piece with you. So you have been called up by a gallery owner or a director of a festival or some musicians, and they have already a face. You know something about them, and you know why they want music from you. They also give you an occasion. You know the context in which the piece will be performed, maybe a program of classical music. So that'll be the only first performed piece or something like that. And also, you know the duration. The duration gives very many restrictions on how your form will develop in certain ways. If it's 3 minutes, it's totally different from 20, for example. And then you have been given the commission for a given ensemble. You know the instruments, so you have an assemblage of sounds that can be done, certain things that can be done, also certain things that cannot be done. And also you might know some of the musicians and you know them, how they are behaving psychologically. So you can also write the music for them, so to speak. So you have already a number of elements that you know something about before you start writing the music. And when it comes to the idea, the notion of idea, concept, inspiration, the calculated intuition can be used just like, you play your scales on the piano, you train your scales. The composer can put up, well, I have 4 notes, I will see how many chords can I make. Then you build a library of chords and spacing of the chords, and then suddenly you might encounter a logic combinations, which then makes you go into the actual composition process. And here you generate musical material, and then you write. And when you have done that, then you might make an analysis of what you have actually been doing. And at that point, we are back in the same kind of loop that the painters were using when they were reading the painting to see what to do next. The same situation is encountered in this situation here. Generation of material structures is, of course, it's here you will use your engineering skills as in music theory, for example. And at a certain time, 2 other notions come in: the idea of differentiation and the idea of articulation. And they will be very much like in the painting. The differentiation is a modification of something which is in the composition already. And the articulation is adding things to articulate structures that are there but are not articulated yet. And I will give you 2 examples. And the first one on differentiation is a piano part in one of my pieces called Violeta from 1999. You see the original, how I composed it in the original form. To the left and to the right, you see the final copy, how it looks like in the final copy. This is a differentiation because the original was made, there's a structure laying underneath and I made it, but then when I copied, I wanted it to be much more pianistic and better and adapting it to the instrument actually. So then I made that adaptation, and that is not a structure in itself, but you can see the texture is different between the 2, but the music and the harmony is the same basically. So that's a differentiation, and that equals, for example, when Per Kirkeby has some forms, then he will put an edge on them. He will be adding something in order to give that form more weight. And the next example is from Dreiklang, which you mentioned, Violeta, from 1982, where we have these label pulsations, as you see. And they are, what you see is we have 2 layers. We have the layer, the melody in the top upper line in the flute, and then we have the harmony in the mid-stave in the viola. So what you should notice is the clarinet part that doubles the accents in the viola part, and thus is articulating a separate rhythmic development, which is actually motivating this label pulsation, the polyrhythms you were speaking about. Violeta, when you introduced me. And here also you see, I have marked them also some kind of differentiations that, for example, suddenly the clarinet takes over what was supposed to be played by the viola player. And in the painting process, I would say that this is equal to working in small details, adding contours, strengthen colors or weakening colors or whatever, that kind of process is. When comparing composition and painting, one thing is important to notice. Music is in time. We listen to music in time. So the music exists only when we listen to it, when we hear it. And it is performed from one end to the other.
Thank you very much, Ivar.
On the other hand, what we hear the musicians playing an interpretation of the score. Yes, I'm very close to the final statement.
Okay.
And painting is out of time. There's no, even though Klee wanted to make the movement into the painting, he did that by adding arrows and that kind of lines that are moving in certain directions. But we read it as spectators. We read it out of time because everybody reads it differently. But on the other hand, it is for first hand. We see what the painter actually put into the painting. So there's only 2 slides. So what we have been seeing, which was common ground for composition and painting in this presentation, is accepting the randomness and also the likeness between music analysis and reading paintings. And then also inspiration understood as calculated intuition. And here is a small tribute to the Klaus Mansman's lecture last 2 weeks ago, where we see Gauss actually saying what I would call calculated intuition is. And thank you now. I'm finished now.
Dear Ivar, thank you very much for the invitation to come to your creative laboratory. And it's interesting, this quotation has give us also the communication with the last colloquium we had with our president, Klaus Mainzer. So I would ask now Dušan Šuput to come to present Manja Hribar.
Hello, everybody, again. It's my big pleasure to present Manja. She's a very young medical doctor, and 7 years ago, she came just at the end of her studies to our lab, and with her help, we started to work on people with some problems in hearing. Either they could be deaf from beginning or later on. And then she specialized in otorhinolaryngology, and she's an excellent specialist in this discipline, still working with us, and we published 2 great papers. So I'm really very proud that she could join our team, and she's really good doctor, a good scientist, and I'm sure she will have a wonderful presentation. So Manja, please start.
So thank you for a nice presentation, and I am really honored to have the opportunity to speak among such distinguished guests. So today I will tell you something about the brain and what happens to them when there is no sound input, and also when we are listening to the music. So I will skip this part and go to the brain part. So the first response to sound was reported in 25th or 26th week of gestation. So we can hear sounds in utero during pregnancy. And the auditory cortex, so the part of the brain that is responsible for processing the sound stimuli, and its connections fully develop between age 5 and 12 years old. And especially for sensory systems, critical or sensitive periods exist in which the brain are, when the brain are most sensitive for those inputs, or even need them for their normal development. So, for instance, if a child who is 3 years old start learning a foreign language, he will probably speak really good, like a native speaker. But if we start learning some foreign language, I don't know, when we are 40 years old, we still can learn it, but we will not speak as a native speaker. So if we miss the sensitive period, we miss that opportunity to be really good in certain thing. And as I work at the ENT clinic, I have the opportunity to implant cochlear implants. That means that we put an electrode into the inner ear of the deaf patient so that they can hear. And if we implant children when they are young, before they reach 1 year, those children can catch up to their peers, and the language development and speech can be practically normal. But if they are implanted like when they're 5 years old and there is no input, no sound input to the brain, the results are not so good. So what do you think happens with the auditory brain areas in the complete absence of the auditory input? There is a possibility that maybe they just don't develop, or are they the same as in normal hearing subjects? Or do you think maybe they can be also used for some other brain functions? So being curious about this topic, we compared brain structure between 14 prelingually deaf adults and 14 normally hearing adults. And we did we did diffusion tensor imaging and native MRI imaging of the head and compared their structure. So in the group where we had deaf people, they used only sign language for communication and didn't use any hearing aids, meaning that their brains were not exposed to any sound input. So we did several analyses to we measured the volume of the Hischel gyrus. This is the primary auditory area, so the area in the brain processing sound. And we also measured the whole brain volume of the white and gray matter, and also surface, thickness, and volume of the brain cortex. And with the help of DTI, we also assessed microstructure of the white matter. So what have we found out? In the auditory areas, deaf subjects have decreased white matter in the Hischel gyrus in the primary auditory area, and also DTIs. So this is an analysis that helps us assess microstructure of the white matter, also showed that they have some alterations in these areas. What about the other areas? We also observed increased gray matter volume in the cerebellum, which is, among other, important for fine motor coordination. For instance, deaf subjects are using sign language to communicate, and they're using their hands. So maybe this is a possible cause for these changes. And we also observed white matter alteration in several other areas. They're listed here in this table, but I will not go through them by names, but I can tell you that those areas are related to processing language, speech, motor coordination, emotional, motor, and sensory processing, and also cognition. So these were our findings. And then we asked ourselves, what about all the other studies that investigated the same alterations? So we searched the PubMed and we gathered all the studies that compared brain structure between prelingually deaf and normal hearing subjects, and we got 30 studies. So this is the table, and now we will go through it one by one. No, I'm just joking. This is really boring, and this was exactly our thoughts. So we thought, okay, let's put all the results in one picture. So I know that here among us are a lot of artists, and I don't think that this picture is really beautiful for you, but for a scientist, this is an interesting picture. So here you can see the alterations in the white matter, where deaf subjects have decreased white matter volume or some other parameters. And the majority of studies, up to 15 studies, found alterations in the primary auditory cortex. So these are the same results as in our study. And you can see that the changes are also in the secondary auditory cortex. Here it is written PT, this means planum temporale. So the auditory areas are the one that have the majority of changes in it. And this picture shows increased white matter among deaf, but only these are the results of one study. So I don't find this really such important as the first one. So I will go to the next picture, which is showing alterations in the gray matter. Here you can see colored in red alterations in the frontal areas, and in the left hemisphere, in this area we have Broca area. This is important for speech production, and as you know, deaf subjects communicate with sound language, with sign language. They don't use spoken language. This might be the cause for these alterations, but the frontal areas are important also for other functions. So when we hear a voice, it is not important just to understand what somebody is saying to us, but it can also elicit certain emotions, and we create memories. And so all of those things are a possible underlying cause for changes in these areas. And deaf subjects have also changes in the occipital area. This is area that is involved in visual processing. And as I already said, the deaf subjects use sign language, which is like a more visual language. This is probably the cause for these alterations. We also observed that there are a lot of alterations in insula. This is a hidden area inside here, and it is important for audio-visual integration. So now we have answered on the first two questions. So the auditory brain areas in deaf are not the same as in normal hearing subjects, but they still are there. But can they be used for other brain functions? So when you look at this picture, you can see that probably those two persons had a nice, fruitful conversation, and maybe they closed a great deal between two companies, or maybe they are just introducing themselves. And in a moment like this, our brain receives a lot of information. But if you're completely deaf, you cannot hear a word your colleague is speaking, nor hear the intonation of his voice. But you can see his facial expressions and you can feel the touch of his hand. And why am I showing you this picture? Because functional studies showed that auditory cortex in deaf can be activated during visual, vibrotactile, somatosensory stimuli, and also during language comprehension. And some studies also show that deaf subjects have enhancement of the remaining senses, like increased tactile sensitivity or peripheral vision skills. And what is interesting is that specialization of the area remains preserved, meaning that the area that was primarily meant for processing moving auditory stimuli can be used for processing of the moving visual stimuli, or the area that was primarily meant for recognition of different voices can then be used for recognition of different faces. So the specialization is preserved. So to conclude about these studies, the most consistent alteration across studies is altered white matter in the auditory areas, and the auditory gray matter is mostly preserved. That means that the white matter, which contains the network of nerve fibers that transfers the information, is altered because probably some other stimulus can reach the gray matter, which is still preserved and can be used for some other function. And deaf subjects have also structural brain alterations in frontal, visual, and other brain areas, and this is probably related to the pure absence of the auditory input, use of sign language, and cross-modal plasticity. And if now we go to the completely other picture, what about when our brains are exposed to sound and when they're exposed to music? What happens? Music, like listening to the music or playing an instrument, activates a large part of our brain. Of course, auditory cortex, because we listen to the sound, and also motor cortex, which is involved in playing an instrument or when we're dancing, and also the emotional part of the brain, like amygdala and nucleus accumbens, and visual cortex when we're reading music. So a lot is going on when we're listening to the music. And what have studies shown? That if we practice music, we can cause structural alterations in brain. So in this study, they had two groups of children, which were around 6 years old, and one group practice piano for half an hour a week for 15 months. And then they compared their brain structure, and they discovered that they had structural brain changes in motor and auditory areas, which were also which correlated with behavioral changes. So they did better on some fine motor skill tests and some music tests. So practicing music can change your brain. What about the other effects of music? Listening to the music you enjoy, it is important that you enjoy it, releases dopamine and also oxytocin. And if I simplify it, it makes you feel good. It also works as a calming agent for anxiety, reduce symptoms of depression, improve cognitive performance, like when you're working and you have a background music, but it is important that it's not bothering you. So it's better to be just some instrumental music. It was shown that it can reduce stress, help manage pain, and also improve mood and motivation. And maybe just an interesting fact that it was shown that people who ate at low-lit restaurants where the soft music was played, they consumed less food. So maybe if you want to consume less food, just put some soft music on and dim the lights and start eating. What about composing music? Okay, this is a little bit harder task to evaluate what is happening, because this is a complicated task which in which we have to use different parts of our brain. So studies show that composing music activates auditory, motor, and visual areas, and that connections between them are stronger. And if you want to imagine, it is hard to put some musician or composer into fMRI and just say, start composing music now and end it now. So it is hard to capture what is going on in our brain. And also an interesting question, can we compose music and not be able to hear it? So without a doubt, the most famous composer to lose his hearing was Beethoven. And he started noticing the hearing loss in his late 20s. And when he was in his 30s, he was on the verge of suicide. And in a letter to his brothers, he wrote, "How could I possibly admit an infirmity in the one sense which ought to be more perfect in me than others, a sense which I once possessed in the highest perfection, a perfection such a few in my profession enjoy or even have enjoyed." So the cause of his deafness is still not known or confirmed, but he managed to compose music even when he suffered from a severe hearing loss. And as you know, he wrote Symphony No. 9 with the famous Ode to Joy when he was completely deaf. And this is regarded by many critics and musicologists as Beethoven's greatest work and one of the supreme achievements in the history of music. And how did he help himself? In the beginning of the hearing loss, he used ear trumpets, like some kind of hearing aids, so that he could hear better. And then it is also described that he put his head on the piano so that he could hear the vibrations. And also that he put a wooden rod to his piano soundboard and clenching the other part between his teeth so that the vibrations would pass into his cochlea, the inner ear. And as I'm an ENT doctor, if Beethoven had otosclerosis, this is a disease that causes ossification of the last ossicle in our ear. We have 3 ossicles which help to transmit sound. If one is stiff and doesn't transmit sound to the inner ear, we have a problem with hearing, but our inner ear is still working. So if we can, in a way, help ourselves to get the sound through the bone to our inner ear, not through the sound, not through the air, then we can hear better. So maybe Beethoven had otosclerosis. And also probably he could compose music because of the memory and because of all the previously established connections between different brain areas, as it was shown that in the musician brain, the auditory and motor networks are strongly linked. And even when the task they're doing involves only the auditory or only the motor processing, the co-activation is observed, meaning that when a pianist is just listening to the music, it can trigger involuntary movement of his hand, or he can just imagine playing the music or the piano or singing notes. So maybe when Beethoven was composing and just looking at the notes, he could hear the music in his head because of all those previously established connections. And besides Beethoven, there are a few other famous composers like Bedřich Smetana, who wrote beautiful Vltava describing the flow of the river through the countryside and the forest, and then the main city, the capital city of Czech Republic, and also some others such as William Boyce, Ignaz Holzbauer, Gabriel Fauré, Rauch Williams. So it is possible to be deaf or have problems with hearing and still compose music. But all these composers and musicians already composed music before. So I don't know, maybe if somebody would just start composing music, it would be harder. Or maybe from the previous lectures, when there was a lecture about coding in music, maybe somebody could create it through the coding. I don't know. Yeah. So thank you for your attention.
Wonderful, Manja. Thank you also very much. We shall begin now possible questions, remarks from our wonderful public. And please just begin. And Dušan, you shall conduct also, you shall conduct the questions for Manja, but we begin now with a question for Ivar. Or may would like to. It is also possible to write in the chat, and I can. We can also follow your questions and remarks in the chat. It's a unique possibility to communicate directly with you. And I suppose the first question could be, Ivar, could you tell us something about the idea to compose without hearing? It is a direct communication with Manja.
Yes, I was thinking of it because I think that when Beethoven was able to compose while he was deaf, it was simply because he was so very much into the process that he will hear the music by looking at it. I mean, as soon as he writes the music, he can see if it's wrong or not. You know, you can actually you don't have to listen that much. I mean, I'm seldom using the piano. I'm just simply writing, and then I'm maybe controlling a few things. But in general, you can compose without actually playing the piano or having a sound in your environment. You just write directly to the score.
Mm. That's great to have the answer from the first hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe just another thing, I found it also interesting that Beethoven used all the frequencies in the beginning, and when he started to lose his hearing in the higher frequencies, his music was composed more of the lower frequencies, and then again when he became completely deaf, he started to using the whole range again. So yeah.
Yeah, there will probably be phases that are different, you know, in when he reacts immediately, and then he will compensate, and then afterwards he finds out he's compensating, and therefore he goes back to his intuition and his skills, basic skills as a composer.
Thank you very much. I would like to tell you that Maria Miralja, thanks also. And I see that Matthias first would like to ask you something.
Yes, thank you. So my question corresponding to the case of, being deaf and composing music, is there a case of painting and losing eyesight or being colorblind? Is this a possibility?
I am not familiar with it. I would have to check to answer it, but I think that you can also create pictures and being blind. But I don't have data to have the exact information to answer it.
I mean, the question then would be on what is the process of production being based. You know, if you have no eyesight or only weak eyesight, all these stages of production we've heard about and learned about in creating a painting. How is that influenced by, you would say, a weakness of eyesight, or you know, if you do this kind of serial production, or you work on the painting layer by layer by layer? How could this be done by, you know, if you're not, or if you're weak in eyesight?
If I may add something, you know, Rodin, not a painter but a sculptor, he could make wonderful sculptures just by feeling, you know. But for painting, maybe it is maybe a bit more complicated. I would just, it occurred to me that it's important to compare visual and auditory input. And even if you look at the brain and then social relations, we have a huge part of brain, occipital part, just focused to vision, movement, and so on. And people that lose this side, they can use a big part of brain for other things, like Manja mentioned, for auditory cortex. And you know, in history, they said that blind people were respected like some kind of visionaries, and they were a part of society. But I think for deaf people, it is very complicated to be a part of society. I think that's because, you know, I prefer to listen to radio. If there's a TV turned on, you know, you come in, then you have to follow movement. So you are attracted somehow. But if you lose auditory stimuli, I think that's very complicated. I'd like to ask Manja, although I could ask you in Ljubljana, but you know, if you put cochlear implant in somebody who has been deaf for quite some time, or maybe from birth, is it so that they would be actually disturbed because auditory stimuli could disturb the new function that auditory cortex achieved?
We have quite a few patients that got cochlear implants after a long period of deafness, and we haven't noticed, or at least they haven't told us, that they have any new problems like in the other fields like vision or touch. But some of those patients cannot communicate normally, and the others can. So I don't know what is the difference that in some people the connections from the ear to the auditory cortex are still present, and in the others they're just not. Probably they're replaced by, as you said, some other connections from the vision or touch input.
Yeah, but do you put cochlear implants to somebody who has been deaf from birth for, let's say, 15 years or more?
We have, especially if they had, yeah, you said deaf from birth, but there are a lot of people that had some degree of hearing preservation in the first year of life, and they used, especially if they used hearing aids, so that the auditory pathway was stimulated for a few years, and then there is a period when they didn't use it. And if we put the cochlear implant, they still have some benefit from it. And especially if they have developed speech, because if somebody is deaf from birth and hasn't even developed speech, then I don't know, if you put cochlear implant after 20 years, they can just hear something. They can hear that you just close the door, or that the bell is ringing, but they will have really problem to understand speech. So.
Thank you very much. So we have two thanks from Silvia Hinz and Maria Miralia, but we have also two questions three questions. So first from Liz von Malotki. Thank you for your interesting presentations. You said that the art of music only exists in the moment when you hear it. How do you think about graphic notation as art itself? This is a question for both of the speakers.
Yes, that's interesting. Well, I think that graphic notation as such, there are very many different ways of making graphic notation. And I think that some of them will work very well as art itself, even though you don't hear the music played from the score. Then you can look at the score and have a visual experience, which is aesthetic. But also, if the graphic notation do contain too much information, too much, if it's too directional, I mean, if it's trying to do certain things that the musician should react in certain ways, then that intention will actually diminish the value of the visual value of the impact, because the directionality will go through to the viewer, and the viewer will not be able to handle that information because the viewer is not actually playing from the score. And of course, the music made from a graphic score is art itself. That works fine. There's no way, no limitation to how you produce your music as a composer, or if you are a musician improvising, or that kind, for that sake. That the music, when you hear it, when you listen to it, then it's there as music. But the art itself, that's very much depending on the intentionality.
Manja, could you also do a short response?
I don't know if I can say anything more than Ivar Frounberg said so on this topic.
Thank you very much. And Ernst Poppel would also like to ask you something.
Well, I would like to add something that I have worked with a patient who was blind. Unfortunately, she passed away, and she was nucleated with the age of 20, and she was actually painting. Quite interesting. So that's possible. Another thing, I worked with a composer, Peter Michael Habel, and he has actually composed in the scanner and then wrote afterwards down the notation what he has done. And point number 3, we've done a study actually with students, high school students from Hofer in Germany, Hofer Symphoniker, students that learn music actively compared to the other group. And they actually were also had a higher competence in mathematics and also, by the way, in social competence. So these are just comments I wanted to make.
Thank you very much. We have 2 more questions from the chat. Maya Dolang, beautiful presentation. Do you maybe know any successful musician, composer with cochlear implant?
I don't know, like a world famous musician, but I know that the few patients are actually also, they enjoy listening to the music, but I don't know if they composed any of their own work. I would have to ask them. And this is all I know from my experience.
Thank you. And another question from Anna Zilinska. As far as I know, she is also a musician. She is a violinist and a composer. Dear Manja, have you ever made any examination on singers if their brains activate in the same areas as composers or instrumentalists? I can imagine, how does it all work playing music?
It's an interesting question, but I don't know what is the difference. among the musicians, as I said, the studies show that the connections between certain areas are stronger than in other individuals that don't create music. So I can just assume that maybe between the in the vocalist, I don't know, there are maybe more connections with the areas that are important for motoric of our voice box and auditory cortex, but these are only assumptions. So
thank you very much. Do you have any other question, any other commentary? We could continue.
I had for a long time.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. I am so sorry. I didn't see. Please, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's only a hint for Ivar. This is interesting presentation on the stages in creative processes. And he mentioned in the end my slide with Gauss concerning intuition. Now, the stages in the creative processes, they are perhaps very complicated, but I have only a hint, namely stages in pattern formation and emergence of structure that is well known and well analyzed for lower dimensional systems. For example, in the natural sciences, in the theory of dynamical systems. For example, a fluid, very simple. A fluid, we distinguish certain phase transitions. We say, instead of stages, phase transitions. And phase transitions also happens spontaneously and, so to say, by randomness. When secondary conditions, so-called control parameters, have critical values. For example, critical value in a stream can be the velocity of the stream or a temperature whatsoever. And then we observe that at some critical values, the system spontaneously changes from an equilibrium state, so to say, silence in the fluid, to oscillating. And suddenly, at some critical values, spontaneously emergence of chaotic vortices, things like that. And that is a low-dimensional system in the physical sense. And then we can go to more complicated cases. And anyway, the dynamics with these typical phase transitions in a spontaneous way, that is typical and well known in physics and in chemistry and in biology. And there are the instruments, the mathematical instruments to describe it. For example, control parameters, or there are, following Landau, the so-called order parameters. They describe that these orders are characterized by certain parameters and they change spontaneously. So my idea is to describe with these high-dimensional processes of human creativity, these processes, at least to understand what is going on there. I do not intend to simulate it in the end on a computer, because it is highly complex, even with our tools nowadays, too complex, but we can at least understand what is sometimes called randomness, or Gauss said, by God, and things like this is kind of spontaneous phase transition. I only want to hint at the fact that these kind of processes are not strange in nature, but they are incorporated in the dynamics of natural dynamics.
Thank you. That was very nice. I think actually I can see the idea of having certain values, and if you go over that threshold, then the whole thing changes. And I think that might be the reason why Per Kirkeby says that he takes a nap, and then when he wakes up, he hopes that his intuition is waking up before him, before all the other things. Because I think what happens during the nap, he will actually this highly dense information that he's processing in his brain, it will come to a certain threshold, and then it will be very clear what to do afterwards. And I think that that we have a similar situation if we discuss how you play the bass clarinet, for example. There are so many things that influence the playing that it's easier. I mean, you cannot speak about the humidity in the mouth, the tongue position, the lips position, the reed, and the instrument, and you have a lot of parameters that can be measured one by one, but they cannot be measured all at the same time, because but still the bass clarinet can play the music, and that he works in a higher level of description, which I will call a metaphorical level. So that's why you can use metaphors, because they are sort of a kind of a label you put on a certain situation, and then you can react within that label to adjust all the necessary things that should be adjusted in order to play. So it's a very complex system, and when you want to describe it, you cannot describe it because it's so complex and it evolves so quickly. You can only describe it in metaphors, because the metaphor actually contains a whole world of complexity underneath its surface.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I would like to mention that the composer Oliver Korte wrote, Evelyn Guiney is a world famous percussionist and composer. She is deaf, but not from birth. And I would allow me to ask you first, the composers, and then also the public we still have. Manja told us, and not only Manja, the effects of music. It's really true. Calming, improving cognitive performance. Are you helping? This music is helping us in order to become happier and improve mood, improve motivation, help us to live better and to be happier. This is my question. First to you, Ivar, because you are here, I see. And then I would like to ask, for example, Christopher Fox and then Livia Teodorescu. Just, you do not have to answer long, but just to be sincere and to tell us if when you are composing, do you feel like this? And also when you are listening to music.
Yes, let me say, while I'm composing, I will be concentrated in the sense that I'm trying to keep as many parameters in my mind at the same time, because I will be composing towards something. The position where I am now is as a transition into something that will come afterwards very often. And that means that I have to be concentrated about that. So I don't have any feelings when I'm composing, except that I'm trying simply to keep track of the music.
Wonderful.
But in the best situations, and that's somewhere where there's some kind of feeling of satisfaction, because sometimes, and that I really mean sometimes, it may be 1 out of 10 or something like that, or maybe even less than that, then the music writes itself. So you are actually watching the music writing itself in front of you, and that situation is a very lucky situation, and in that sense you can have a feeling at the same time, because the music is actually driving the whole thing.
Oh yes, yeah. Okay.
More calm. I'm not sure about, because I think it also depends very much on the nature of your psychology, so I would be very, very cautious to say any definitive thing about that.
Yeah, you didn't really answer the question, but in fact you said something very interesting, because I remember in an interview with Erich Maria Remarque, how is he writing? And he said that at the very beginning, he's planning what he's going to write in his novel. And after a while, the characters are acting themselves. It's interesting to say something similar. I would like to ask Christopher Fox, what do you have an answer? It's really doing something music with you when you're writing or you are listening music?
I think this is too complicated a question. I think I would echo what Ivar just said, that I sometimes I'm doing what's really almost a mechanical task, just working something into something else. And sometimes I'm thinking of it almost as a drama between the musicians, and sometimes I'm thinking of how the music might sound for an audience. And the one thing I would add after Manja's presentation is that we're in an interesting position where, for my generation of composers who are now quite old, lots of us, like Ivar, spent a lot of time making our music more or less in our heads, like Beethoven relying on our memory of the sounds that we've already heard. And we now have two generations of younger composers who almost exclusively work with sound, usually from their computer, less so from pianos. And I think I detect a change in the way that music sounds because of this different sort of neurological activity that makes the music. But this is just pure speculation. Anyway, thank you for asking.
Thank you. In fact, it is only we believe what Manja said. Of course, it's scientific researches. But I just wanted to ask, because I myself asked myself, so calming agent for anxiety, reduce symptoms of depression, reduce stress, help manage pain, improve mood, improve motivation. So if we can say yes or not, because in fact it's really demonstrated by the research, but if we are conscious about. So Livia, would you like to say only yes or not, maybe? Unmute.
I'm not sure composing is reducing anxiety if you have anxiety for doesn't matter what reason. By the contrary, I think the anxiety comes with the fear that the result will not be the one you have the intuition to be. So let me, Violeta, tell you that first I have intuitions, and I will link this with Ivar Frounberg's concept, calculating intuitions. So I think it's a dynamic between this playing with intuitions and calculating and analyzing intuitions during the composition process. And I don't think composing is making you happy. It is making you happy when the performers are sharing your intuitions.
Okay, good. So wonderful.
Yeah.
I would like now to ask
the opportunity to listen to your music. So this makes us cool to listen to your music. Yeah.
Violeta, if you allow me, I want to ask Ivar Frounberg if I can something about his presentation. So if you allow me 2 minutes, Violeta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it's demonstrated. Manja demonstrated something which is really happening with us.
Yeah,
everybody is listening to music, so. But I was just curious.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
To listen to your
question was.
Yeah. So Oliver,
Ivar, it's a pleasure to see you again and to hear your presentation and to follow your perfect shaped thinking. I am interested in something you mentioned, if I understood correctly, about the poetry of incompleteness. When do you know the work is incomplete enough to generate poetry or to generate tension? You mentioned that Morton Feldman about this decomposition, incompleteness. So I would like you to maybe to develop this poetry of incompleteness, and also to explain a bit more about calculating intuitions, if it's what I thought. I mean, to actually to analyze your intuition and to make them fit in your composition.
Yes, the incompleteness, I think, it's quite simple actually, because when you have a given structure, then the structure isn't interesting because it's existent. It is a stable situation. So as soon as you interact with it, so as soon as you break something, you make an incompleteness of the whole system, then it becomes into existence, because then you will hear that there's this twist to it that means that you suddenly be aware of that there is a system, and there was something that was breaking off here. Even though you don't know you cannot hear what the system is or whatever, you will have that feeling of incompleteness or change, and that change will force you to be interested, to follow again, because as soon as you have a given structure, then it's flat. It's just there. And say, okay, yes, it's nice weather, the sun is shining. Right. But then come a cloud and it starts raining, and then now it's raining. Then you're aware of the sun is shining in a much deeper way than only if the sun is shining, for example. So I think that's what he means about the breaking this and also not going too much into a method, right? Because if you have a structure and you're just following it, then it's a method, basically, because you can recreate, the structure recreates itself somehow.
But you should
they
somehow
are linked together, these things are linked together. But then calculated intuition, I think the thing is that the intuition works if you just speak of intuition, but calculated intuition is nice because you can actually do something, right? You can sit down and you said, okay, I have 4 pitch classes and I want to see all the spacings of these, and then suddenly you see what if the flute was playing that note. And then you are instrumentating it. And then you are doing certain things, right? And then you are composing, actually. But you are not intending to compose. You are just intending to actually see the different chord structures and see how they were and how they would feel and how they will sound at the piano or whatever. You are doing that kind of mechanical thing. And then suddenly it becomes, there's a lucky combination that gives you a hint that this is a very interesting thing. And then you are getting interested in it, and then you are composing. So you could actually, or you could, by working so much with these mechanical processes, you could also go to bed, and then when you wake up the next morning, you know, I want that chord. I want to do that one. I didn't do that. I didn't think of that, but now I can think of it. Now I can see it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way you can. I like the notion of calculation with intuition, because these two can be combined, and they can feed each other in many ways. Was it clear?
Yeah.
Oh, clear. I don't know.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
So listening to your explanation, you know, we can think about you are looking for the sense in your life, and you are succeeding looking for the sense in your life. So it's like a feeling of luck, no? I would like also to ask Oliver Porte. My question, it is a question of Manja, in fact.
Oh, yes. Good question. The question is, has music made me smarter? The question is somewhat hypothetical, I think, because I don't know how stupid I were if I hadn't had my music. But frankly, considering the greatness of music, I feel myself often quite limited. And music stays a mystery to me. And I have to confess that also composing is not all fun. Sometimes it's downright torturous to me. And I just don't know why I continue to compose. But yeah, all in all, I guess music is a great source of joy. But in the composing process, sometimes you feel so limited and so small with this mass of information and this mass of decisions you have to make, that you downright don't know why to continue and how to continue.
But you
Or
also
maybe I were even more stupid if I didn't have the music.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Oliver. But the question also include the idea of what happens when you are listening to music. And so not only for that's why I said first I would like to ask the composers, and then if you would like also to answer, because everybody listens to music, the one who has a possibility of hearing, and also the one who with rest of hearings, they also listen to music, can listen to music.
Yeah.
Who would like also to answer? or if you want to continue.
Yeah, listening, of course, is great joy, but I think it depends on the music. I remember that Morten Feldman said about his own music, especially about the longer pieces, that he loves to fall asleep while listening to the music. And when he wakes up again, he knows that the music is still there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think for a possible continuing of the research of what is done, what does music with us, I think it is very interesting to continue kind of interviews and to discover the incredible, endless possibility to answer. Would you like, Dušan, is you still there?
Yeah,
please?
I'm still here. I'm still here just to see if I can show my picture. I'm in the car. Well, one thing which I wanted to mention, that stupid people usually do not doubt about themselves very much. So what you said somehow shows that you are not stupid. And maybe music, that's a half joke, but I think that you cannot judge only by yourself. The studies usually show comparison of a group of people that do something compared to another group of people that don't do the same thing. And I think that what was shown is quite clear. I must just mention that not so long ago, there was a competition in mathematics. And my granddaughter, she won a prize, and a couple of other people also, and they were all in the same music school too. And it was a state competition. So people that were in music school also won in this math competition. I think there's some connection, but we don't know what was first. You know, whether what was first, the math or the music. That's just to add. I'm in a car, so I have to focus on traffic too. I will not speak too much, but I really enjoyed every word that you all said. You also, including the questions. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to turn myself off. I will just follow you by listening. And goodbye. And really wonderful lectures, as usually. Fantastic. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Also, Manja.
Yeah, maybe I would just like to comment. Yeah, also the studies have shown that the people that are practicing music are better also at some other fields. So maybe because all those connections are reinforced between different areas. And when you were speaking about how music, what kind of impact it has on us, so like a calming effect, yeah, it depends on the type of music. But maybe I would just like to mention that also the frequency is important, because the frequency range, the human frequency range is from 20 to 20 kilohertz. And so we don't hear infrasound or ultrasound, so that different animals can hear. And the infrasound, so the frequencies that are below our frequency range, can elicit a feeling of fear, or also dizziness and a strange feeling in our bodies, and also resonance of some organs. They also show that they took a little piece of a heart muscle and put it in the lab. They exposed it to the infrasound, and they noticed that it causes decreased contractibility of the heart muscle. So also there is also a sound that we cannot hear, and also impacts our health and also the feelings. So just a comment.
I would just add to that, because the ultrasound, I mean, you can, there was some at a computer music presentation for many years ago in Japan. They had doubled the sampling rate. That means that you have frequencies up to 40 kilohertz. And they were playing in a controlled situation, playing back music sampled in 20 kilohertz, up to 20 kilohertz and up to 40 kilohertz. And there was a subjective feeling of better resolution, or that the music better was reproduced when you had the extra octave on top of the whole thing. So when you got up to 40 kilohertz, so that means probably, I think that the theory about that is about that the vibrations simply are taken in the cranium, in the heart bones of our head, and then we do hear something, but we do not. We don't just describe it as hearing, but something is there, I guess.
Yes, as far as I know, these infrasound, meanwhile, they are forbidden, but they are not producing only anxiety. They are producing also ecstatic feelings. So in the disco atmosphere, and now they are controlling, and in the radio stations, they are really controlling and are not allowed to produce such deep sounds. We never really listen, but our body is listening and reacting.
Yes. You can actually feel on your body the bass, you know, the bass drum, for example. You feel very much, right? And you know also that double bass players are placed on the same podium, because when they're tuning the double bass player, the double bass, they cannot hear if it's pure or not. But what they can feel if they are in accordance, if they have the same phase as the others. So they can actually tune by controlling the phase between the different contrabasses. So they don't tune by ear, but they tune by feeling.
Well, I would just like to listen to what Adelheid Krause-Pichler told us. She says that this colloquium, with this wonderful colloquium and with the sensational discussions, this is something, is for her one of the best colloquium she could be with us. 1000 Dank an alle, 1000 thanks. And I would like now to say all the best for you, and to ask again our President Klaus Mainzer to say the last words. And see you in 2 weeks. We shall have also again our colloquium with Wolfgang Masnak and Athanasia Prinza. Thank you very much. And Klaus, please, the last word.
The last word. Now, I think we have a very difficult topic this evening, namely human creativity. And in my talk last time, I already tried to approach it from what is nowadays a hot discussion, namely AI. How far can we, by technology, simulate it? And personally, under the impression of our discussion today, I more and more doubt that we will be able to grasp from a technological point of view these highly complex processes. But I want to underline what I said before. Creative processes are not only restricted to human and to the human mind, but the spontaneously emergence of new structure that is typical also in nature. And it seemed to be that were the previous steps in nature to prepare creative processes which we now observe in the human mind. So perhaps that, and so that's my last remark. I remember Whitehead. Whitehead is a great mathematician and philosopher in the 20th century. And he had already this idea that evolution in the end is a creative process. All things are in being, and the emergence of new, that means in the end creativeness, and that is amazing, absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you also. Bye-bye and see you again. Thank you so much.